Okay, hello, hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to a new live event with Career Foundry. Today, all about designers and developers collaboration for beginners. We're going to give it a moment before starting with the presentation that Kylie and Noella have prepared for us so more people can join and get settled. Meanwhile, please go ahead and put in the chat your name from where you are watching us and maybe why you are interested in a career change into tech in the chat on the right hand side. Maybe it would be also really fun and cool to see in what teams you are. So maybe you could share if you are in the designers team or if you are in the developers team or if you are in both teams or even if you don't know. So it's totally fine, but it would be really fun to see what team you are. Let's introduce ourselves now. My name is Belinda. I'm events manager here at Career Foundry. And today I have the great pleasure to be joined by Kylie Weber and Noella Mwanzia. So welcome both to the channel. Noella and Kylie will introduce themselves in a bit, but I would like to mention that Kylie is our expert in product design and Noella is our expert in software engineering. Kylie has been with us previously in other webinars, super nice webinars, so they are still available on our events page. So you are feel free to check them out. And Noella is the first time she's with us, so again, welcome, Noella, and I hope you enjoy this webinar. I would like to introduce you to Career Foundry. Career Foundry is the online school for your career change into tech. We guide you from complete beginner to job-ready tech professional and help you land your first job in the field. We are not any old school. Our programs are so flexible that you don't need to quit your job to change your career. You get regular one-to-one mentorship from not one, but two industry experts. And if you don't land a job within 180 days of graduation, we refund your tuition. And this is our job guarantee. Please let me also share with you a few of our house rules. This webinar is going to be recorded and we will send the recording out tomorrow via email for those who are registered in Big Marker. If you have any question for Noella and Kylie, please pop them in the chat in the Q&A tab and we will answer them at the Q&A. On the other hand, if you have any question about Career Foundry's programs, my recommendation is to book a call with one of our program advisors. They are lovely people. They would love to speak with you and they will answer all of your questions. So this is the best chance to get your questions answered. And I won't take any more time. I would like to see the chat. Okay, we have people from New York, Cologne, graphic designer, France, visual design, Dubai. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing this in the chat, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session. And please, Kylie and Noella, go ahead and have a lot of fun.
Right, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Belinda, again, as always. Fantastic host. I'm so stoked to be here. And yeah, I'm really excited about this topic. It's been a while since we came out with a webinar from the last one that I did. But yeah, I'm joined today by friend and fellow software engineer here, Noella. And just a bit of context as to a little bit about our background and where we met and everything. Noella is not only a fantastic software engineer, but also a very good friend. And so I'm very happy to have her here today. One of her first webinars here with us. So guys, let's give her some positive prep. It's nice that she's here with us to give her insights, and we're really excited to hear about that. So yeah, I will talk a little bit about me, but I just want to give a bit of context on our collaboration and how we work together. We started our collaboration and working together on it was a product called Syndic for You. And that's where we first came in contact with each other. And actually, we worked side by side for quite some time. And so that's why we feel that we have a lot of insights to provide beginners in terms of how to collaborate and how to compromise as well between, on the design side and then also on the development side. I would like to kind of address what I mean by collaboration. So we will walk through that and in terms of, what designers look at and consider important in terms of collaboration, how software engineers and what they consider important in terms of collaboration and what it means, and the muddy area in between, which is what we'll be dealing with in terms of challenges, and then kind of working through later on how to manage those challenges. So we've split this webinar kind of into perspectives. So I will tackle the topic from the perspective of a product designer, but this also will look at UX designers, UI designers, and the like. And Noella will tackle the perspective from the developer side, or the software engineering perspective. And then at the end, we'll have a really kind of insightful Q&A session between Noella and myself, which would be quite interesting to do, sitting here and having a back and forth in terms of some important questions. So that was just an overview of what we'll be handling. So I will kind of jump in a little bit about me. So for those of you who have seen my webinars in the past, you'll know a little bit about me. For those who don't, which I'm sure there are quite a few, yeah, my name is Kylie Weber, and I actually come from hospitality background. So I was never always in tech. I worked in hospitality and tourism for about 6.5 years before coming into the tech field. And I was kind of introduced to it through a friend of mine who kind of asked me, like, oh, have you heard about UI UX design, once I was looking to transition out of hospitality from quite a severe burnout. So I was really thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, and I wanted to do something interesting and use my creative side. And that's how I kind of came into dealing with, trying to see if design would be best suited for me. And that's how I came into contact with Career Foundry. And initially, why I decided to go with Career Foundry was just the care that they took in finding the best course for me was just amazing. And I just found that human touch to be really good. Like, so that's why I chose Career Foundry. It wasn't necessarily because I knew like their courses were the best, which they are really one of the best on the market. It was just more because of how they treated me as an individual in my career transition. And then, of course, how I got here, and that's being a product designer. So I have a lot of steps in between getting to this particular part of my career. I had my first opportunity, like I mentioned before, at a company called Syndic for You, which was a company or a SaaS product that helped owners in a building manage their accounting. And so that was a really great product, and we worked with a great team. I had exposure to an amazing product owner, and that's actually how I got into being a product designer. He was leaving the company, and he actually took me under his wing and thought, I think you'll be really good at not just the UI design aspect, but actually being able to be a product designer, which is kind of this, what I felt was a midway between product owner and being a designer. In startups, it's always like you have to be, jack of many trades. You kind of have to know a lot and be dipping into a lot of different teams within the scope of the company. And it was actually through that transition that I became a product designer with Syndic for You. And then when I left Syndic for You and we parted ways at some point, I then joined a company called Farm Better. And that's currently where I am right now. And Farm Better is an agricultural kind of tech company that brings digital solutions to farmers in about 9 countries. So it's a fantastic product. And so that's a little bit about me and my background and how I came to be not only in tech, but where I am today. And this transition between going from UI designer to product designer. I will let Noella take over and explain a little bit about herself before we continue.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. So as was mentioned, my name is Noella. I am a software engineer by profession. A little bit about my journey and how I got here. Tech was never necessarily on my radar growing up. It was actually one of the last things at the back of my mind once determining what I wanted to transition into. Later on when I started having a career. So initially, funny story is I initially wanted to really become like a doctor. So my idea was, study medicine and then become a medical practitioner. And so unfortunately, after clearing high school, I pretty much missed the cutoff points by to be able to join medicine by about 2 cluster points. That was a bummer because I think medicine was my plan A through to C. And then from there, it was just trying to figure out, what next. And unfortunately, so it was quite unfortunate, but I had to sort of go with elimination method, trying to figure out, what I wanted to do. So more like picky, ponky. And I ultimately settled on doing business and IT in campus. But IT was never necessarily, still something that I would see myself doing. It was actually more supposed to be like a blend. like tech was supposed to make me a bit more marketable in the business world. But somewhere along the lines, little did I know that my course, or rather, like the course that I took in campus, had more to do with IT, like more of the technical side, than it did the business side. So I ended up falling in love. And I remember actually one of those exact moments was we had a course whereby we were introduced to web development. And I remember, the joy that I got just writing tags on HTML, just and then seeing them on the browser, and like simple things like adding images on a website or changing the background color. Yeah, so that's pretty much where my love and my passion for tech started. And then from there, it was pretty much just trying to learn as much as I could from especially online. So, started out with things like Code Academy, Free Code Camp. So just pretty much using a lot of free online resources to sort of get started. Yeah, and then like I was able to finish school, and then right immediately was able to get my first job. And that was pretty much in a software development agency. So this pretty much had an advantage because it gave me a leeway where I was able to build, or rather work on multiple projects, from different countries, and, from pretty much diverse sort of backgrounds. Ended up building products that had like up to hundreds of active users. So that was actually like a cool way to start off my career. So pretty much started off, of course, like as an intern, and then with time I was able to like progress through the ranks and ended up leading a team. So that's pretty much also like where I got to meet and work with Kylie. So that's cool stuff. So what am I still doing today? I'm still a software engineer. Yeah. Yeah. So over to you, Kylie.
All right, cool. Awesome. Yeah, so that's a little bit about us and kind of where we're coming from, our experiences. So you can tell like we have two very different perspectives lined up for you guys today. And this isn't a battle as such. It's more like the challenges that we've faced, in the real world and working together, and how we've managed to bridge those gaps. And I think Noella also comes with interesting background, because as well as being a software engineer, there was also this aspect of like product development and the product management aspect. So there's also like a really interesting combination there that actually that's where we were able to work really well. So yeah, thanks for that. And so I will take over from here, kind of running the presentation until the end of my part, which will be the perspective of a designer. And before we get into the actual perspectives and the challenges, I'd like to just kind of encompass, a lot of people on this call are probably not, they wouldn't see themselves, maybe label themselves as product designers. I do at this point in my career, and it's where I see myself heading. But we do probably have UX designers, UI designers, or maybe people who are using the combination of both, depending on the kinds of companies you're looking at. If you're a beginner, is it that maybe you're looking at bigger companies or startups or whatever it is? But I just really want to just focus on those roles, because I think it's still important that these bits of feedback and challenges are not just isolated to product designers. It is everyone within that design space will probably see these challenges. I would think UX designers maybe a little less, because they are really more involved in the beginning of the design phase. But I think it's still important to understand the challenges later down the line when it comes to certain aspects of the product lifecycle. So okay, I will just cover the basics of that, which is if you're a UX designer here, you're probably dealing with more like the mapping out. So this is UX defines where users want to go. What do they want to do? What do they want to actually achieve through this product? So we have UX designers here in the audience. We have UI designers who then the responsibility of them would be UI helps to get people where they need to go. So you have the map, which is handed over from the UX designers. But now, how do we get to that goal? Are we using a car? Are we using a train? Are we using a plane? And this is kind of where that UI interface, the interesting, colorful part of design, I would say, comes into play, which is what attracted me initially to UI design. And then a product designer is more the study of how that car operates once the journey begins. So great, you have the map, you have the car, you got the passengers, but kind of what happens once the journey begins. And that's where product designers have a much larger voice at the table, I would say, in comparison to other design roles. But it also depends on the organization, depends on the setup, the culture, and a lot of other things. But usually these people have a lot more, they have a roadmap probably in mind that's probably a higher priority than, for example, I would say a UX designer would have. But again, this is depends on the organization. So just some context as to everyone in the design space, that these points and feedback could be really interesting, and the collaboration challenges that you'll see. So let's look at what we mean by collaboration. So we'll look at the two perspectives here, and I'll just cover both perspectives, and I think Noella will touch on a few of these individual things in her part of the presentation. But a designer is, certain keywords come into mind when you think of a designer and the way they communicate, the way they collaborate. And this is, being a researcher, being an investigator, being a creative thinker. How are we going to help users overcome this challenge? How are we going to make it easy for them? The planning aspect, I think, of being a planner is more, again, from the product designer perspective. How are we planning the work out? How are we going to put this work in the pipeline to then later be handed off for development? So that's probably more on the product design perspective. But also designers are very detail orientated. So from where they come from and the perspective they're coming from is very different from that of a software engineer, who is probably more, like Noella's highlighted here, a technical problem solver, a feasibility accessor. They're probably looking at totally different things than a designer would be looking at. They are scalability curators, for example, UX architects. They're thinking of more structural build questions and how are we going to do this. So structural thinkers versus creative thinkers. And that's probably where it starts becoming interesting, and this muddy part and the challenges that you'll see. So there are tons of challenges that you'll face as beginners. And this doesn't just apply to beginners, but it applies to people who have had experience in the field or had experience in working between design and tech. But I've highlighted what we believe, or we have highlighted what I believe, the 5 kind of top challenges that you will expect to face as designers during this collaboration. One of them is communication. The second one is perspectives. The third is time and timeframes. The fourth is priorities and focus, which kind of links to perspectives, kind of feeds off perspectives, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And the last one is handoff, which is probably the most debatable, talked about topic when it comes to the collaboration, because designers feel, in a way, okay, I've done all this design work and I've designed everything, everything's ready, and now I need to give it, hand it over to the software engineer or developer who is going to build out that feature. And that's probably where you'll see a lot of focus, but there are steps before this point that could already lead to issues that make that process even more complicated. So let's look at these challenges from the designer perspective. So when it comes to communication, I've listed a few points here, but I don't want to list them off for you here. I think we can read them, but I'd like to give you just an overview of why this is an issue. I think communication is huge for designers. I think designers generally want to know. They want to know about their designs. They want questions. They want feedback. And I think sometimes in the process we find where everybody says the design is good. Oh, that looks good. That's good. That'll work. And these are kind of the blanket comments that are put in the design phase that later lead to problems when it comes to handoff. Designers have a very creative style of communication. I think sometimes we do try different ways of communicating our designs. It isn't that we say, there's the design file. I think it shouldn't end there. There should be more to it. And I think we do try to do that and to communicate that. We do have a sense of perfectionism out there. I think we do have designers who can relate to that once you get into design and you're really engrossed, we feel that it's the communication, that we are communicating perfectly. And that doesn't just reside in the design space, it's also in the way we communicate, that we think it's fine, the way we are doing things, which can sometimes cause problems. Designers also prefer to take time. They prefer to take time in how they communicate something and make sure they get it right, which is part of that perfection point that we just covered. And we are all around conversations and communication around user needs and what the user wants to accomplish, and what, user-focused mindset, which is what our responsibilities are. But sometimes it can get a bit muddy when it comes to communicating that with engineers and developers. And we often, at least from a product designer perspective, what I find is I am also quite focused on product goals. So I'm constantly looking back at, for example, the roadmap, for example, which I'll cover a little bit more in priorities. The next point that the next challenge that I would like to cover is perspectives. This is a huge one. I think perspectives is always going to be a problem in different teams across a company, right? So the perspective of designers is that we are looking at interactive user experiences. We want to improve this all the time, constantly pushing the bar, constantly following trends and trying to see what works for our users. So again, user perspective first, right? That's what we're taught as well. And in most of design schools, this is what you'll be taught and be driven towards. And then we have this perspective of, in our minds, when people push back our designs or try to find ways to redesign something we've done, it'll be like, there's a reason it's designed that way. That's what designers feel and think. Like, I've spent months on this design and there's a reason why that it's been done this way, and there's certain stakeholders that have been involved. So sometimes we do feel a bit touchy when engineers come in to try to start asking, oh, but couldn't this button just look like this, or couldn't it just be here? Could it not be round and be, I don't know, square? I don't know. Just because for them, they're just not looking at the perspective that you're looking at. So perspectives is a huge one. Time frames is that as designers, we spend a lot of time, right? So I mentioned this already before. We spend sometimes weeks, months on designs, depending on how large the feature is. And so when it comes down to handoff or getting feedback from developers, it's very difficult. This isn't even about feeling personal about your designs. It's just the amount of time that's gone into it. So we're going to look at how to kind of find a solution to this later on in the presentation, when we deal of how we can kind of solve this and how we can bridge the gap. And we are not thinking about, like what Noella will also discuss later, we're not thinking about things like feasibility. We're not thinking always about deadlines or deliverables. These are not the words that you hear often within the design space, whereas like, be creative and, how can we improve this user flow? How can we make this easier? Maybe users don't understand something. So we're constantly trying these creative methods. So there's certain words and terms we are not really used to hearing as designers. So as beginners, I think it's good to understand these words and get familiar with them, because this is really going to be key in your success and in collaboration and communication. The next one is focus, or priorities and focus. Like I said, we are focused on user experiences. We are focused on delivering features that improve the user experience. And as from the product designer perspective, we are then looking again, roadmaps. Is the direction we're heading still aligned with the higher goals? Are we still heading in the right direction? Because that can also become a problem when it comes to collaboration, where we think sometimes features tend to take a different turn when they're handed off for maybe really legit reasons. But that could sometimes be something that we're constantly looking at. And also gathering user feedback. So those are our priorities. We are looking at, user feedback, designing for users. And this is just very different from the software development perspective. Not that they're not looking at user needs, but they have a lot more to think about in terms of functionality, which Noella will cover. And of course, the last one, but probably the most debatable one, is handoff and the processes. So we also think, I often thought as a designer that my design speaks for itself. If I've taken the time to, for example, create a prototype, something clickable that you can go through and hot points, and when I hand over my designs to a developer or a software engineer, to me, you have everything you need. But this may not always be the case, because context sometimes lacks, because they are not always involved in every single aspect of the design process as to how we got to this design. So that's something as designers I think we need to think about in terms of this concept of, well, it should be quite obvious, and sometimes it's not obvious. And this is one of the key things, or some of the key things that I think are important, and that kind of links to responsibilities. So having our responsibilities as product designers, are the ones that I've highlighted here, are not the only responsibilities, but they're some of the top ones in regards to collaboration and these challenges. So in communication, one of our key responsibilities are to have really good detailed user stories. So do not have this mindset that the design will speak for itself. for example, when cards are written to be handed over to developers, they need to understand the context. They need to understand why, what user need are we trying to fulfill, what end goal is there, what extended features are going to come on top of this feature that we're designing if it's a new one. So detailed user stories is really important when it comes to communication. Gathering dev feedback to align on expectations earlier in the process may not be our responsibility, but we should ask the question. It may not be us to say, could we bring a dev person in? But it could be us to ask, why isn't there a software engineer involved in this process? So they can already tell us the limitations of this product early, or this design early in the process, so we don't go through months of design to figure out their now limitations. Take into account time frames and deadlines. So this is not something, as designers, design is always ahead of development. So we're kind of like ahead of the game. And sometimes we need to understand that what we design isn't just as simple and ends in Figma or in XD or whatever tool you're using. This is being handed over to a software engineer who has to implement this. And that's important when it comes to deadlines and timeframes, because they then become responsible for delivering this. And that is a lot of pressure for a software engineer. So yes, some features have to be designed. We use this as a reason it's been designed that way, but we need to also be flexible. We need to also do it within a way that the whole team can move forward and we don't have bottlenecks or passing deadlines because we just couldn't make certain things. Be flexible in your understanding. So that's part of deadlines as well. When we think of, priorities and focus, and like we are focused on, our responsibilities, but we also need to be flexible in understanding how can we best deliver this feature to the end user that still enables them to complete their goals and have a satisfactory experience, but still within certain timeframes and deadlines. The last one is, it's in terms of handoff, is create, I think this is key. I really believe in creating understandable, easy to use design presentations in terms of prototypes. I really have seen designers give Figma files to software engineers. And this for me is just, we have a due diligence to at least give them a platform to stand on. I think handing over Figma files is just not the way to do it. That's just, I don't know, it's just my perspective. I think we have a responsibility to help them through that. So that's, at least in terms of handoff, there are things we can do. Of course, I'm not going to go into tools in this presentation because, I think everyone, at least if you're a beginner designer, you've probably had, been introduced to Figma or Adobe XD or InVision or prototyping tools, and there are just so many tools. But I think it is our responsibility to make our designs as understandable and easy as possible. And if we combine prototypes, or easy clickable prototypes, with detailed user stories, this will help software engineers tremendously. So that's just my perspective from a product designer, and I will now hand over to Noella, who will walk us through the perspective from a software engineer.
Okay, awesome. I think you've captured like a lot of things, but before I get into the challenges that we also face as developers, I think we need to start somewhere. And there's like a lot of people who are involved in the development process when it comes to the actual implementation. So first of all, let's try and understand what all of these people do. So first of all, there's three major stakeholders. There's like a lot because tech is always evolving nowadays, and you'll find that, there's all these, new professions coming up. But the three main underlying ones are, there's a software developer, there's a software engineer, and there's a solutions architect. So first of all, let's start at the top. So just like the same way we have like architects, building architects, they come up with a blueprint and then determine, how the structure, like what type of structures this building is supposed to have, designing the blueprint, what goes where and all that. The same way we also have solutions architect or software architects, who pretty much give a high-level overview of what a software, or rather like an application, is supposed to look like. So these people come in, they're usually pretty much like developers, like engineers, like with years of experience, So it's usually like, they give, based on the experience, they sort of have an understanding of what type of systems, or rather what types of frameworks and which type of databases, etc., something of that sort, that's pretty much going to solve the problems that we're trying to solve with this particular software. So Similar to what architects do in real life. So once they're done with the blueprint, it doesn't necessarily mean that these people have to go ahead and actually get their hands dirty by actually doing the actual thing. So in most cases, solutions architect don't necessarily involve themselves in the actual development. Next, I have software engineers. So most do software engineers. Pretty much people are always in the entire software development life cycle. So these guys are going to be involved from the analysis. They're going to help out, like clearly defining helping out with the analysis, gathering, helping out with designing, the solutions that are supposed to be implemented. They also get their hands dirty by doing the actual development, and then helping out with things like testing and QA. So throughout the software development life cycle hook. And then we finally have developers. So developers, where do they come in? So developers are pretty much, their role is usually mostly involved in the development cycle. So it's usually them doing the actual implementation. So for example, they're handed over designs, or they're handed over technical solutions that they're supposed to implement by the engineers, and then they get their hands dirty. So where their role is pretty much doing the implementation and then helping out with QA and testing. And I think before we proceed, one of the misconceptions that we have when it comes to the whole concept of software developers and software engineers is it's not usually all about coding, but software developers or other software engineers are pretty much usually problem solvers. And what this basically means is business mostly. When we talk about business, we're including, like the designers and product managers and the product designers and all these people. So they give problems to the developers or the developers or the engineers, and then they're supposed to figure out, using code, how to best and effectively solve these particular issues that are brought to their attention. So Kylie has gone through the chunk of challenges that they go through as designers when it comes to the collaboration with software engineers. And I think it's also my turn to stand up for developers and engineers, and also clearly and to clearly state some of the challenges that we go through. And I think one of the most important things is actually, or rather, like we as developers need designers to sort of understand is software developers usually get judged on their speed. And so that basically means that most software developers are going to sort of use mechanisms whereby they sort of try and make the process efficient, the development process efficient. And I don't know if you've heard of the term lazy programmer. So a lazy programmer doesn't necessarily mean that, it comes to like, I'm lazy, I don't want to do my work, but it's coined from like a developer not wanting to really make the work effective. So what we end up doing, say for example, we are handed over the designs, I'll sort of try and look for a pattern. I'll see, like, for example, on all these call to actions, we need like a pop-up model that asks like a user to confirm that they need to sort of to proceed, they want to proceed with this particular action. And developers will usually look for these patterns, and then they'll create components, reusable components, so that the next time that they need this piece of functionality, they don't have to start it from scratch. So all this is usually determined by the designs that were handed off. And one of the challenges, or rather some of the challenges that can arise from this is scope creep, sorry. And this basically means, when you've already started out the development, and then, the design is reaching out like, oh, sorry, we need to change this or that. So this sort of disorients the work that has already been done. And I think another one is pretty much inconsistency when it comes to the system design, or rather to the designs that are handed off. Say, for example, in this particular part of the application, we started with this chunk of consistency. We've created, like reusable components that you can be able to proceed with, and then like later on, sort of the design system sort of changes, and that like sorts of makes you have to do all this work all over again. And I think one of the things that also in terms of perspective, there's a bit of difference because, as Kylie mentioned, when it comes to developers, they focus on user experience, but we as developers sort of focus on functionality. I'm pretty sure if you left developers to sort of do their own designs, you're just going to get some really ugly looking interfaces, but at the end of it, it's going to work. So I think that's like a good thing for developers. Yeah, so for us, it's really important. Functionality is actually key. As long as the system works, then hey, yeah, that's all that matters. So user experience, not really usually our primary focus as software as software developers or engineers. And I think one major challenge that I think most engineers faced is having, or rather being handed over, unrealistic designs. And remember, I started off by saying that developers are usually judged by their speed, right? And I think from a developer, when they go to the Zen realm, and then they're coming up with all these like design, really cool to look out, really cool to look at. They take you through the prototypes, and you're mind blown, but you're only mind blown for like a second, and then you remember, like how much work it's going to take. So I think having to work, with having like working, or rather working with developers who rather necessarily don't necessarily understand the sort of balance between the time aspect of it, and the like how much time it's going to take to do the actual implementation. Yeah, so there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance between the creativity versus the resources. Okay, that being said, it also sort of depends with the type of company that someone works in, because you'll find that in more big and established companies, they have maybe like someone dedicated to working on this particular button, or like the animations. So yeah, that's pretty much relative and subjective. But for most startups, you'll find that like everyone is just rushing, trying to get out the door an MVP or something of that sort, or rather, there's like a lot of features being built, and there's like a lot of pressure on the developers. So yeah. Yeah, I think one of the ways, or rather some of the ways that we can also be able to counter some of these things in terms of issues that we face with developers is, as Kylie mentioned, trying to ask the question when it comes to when because the collaboration between developers and designers is not necessarily is not supposed usually to come in during the handing off, where you just bring the designer and the developer together, and then it's purely just handing off the designs, or rather showing how the designs work. It's pretty much usually advised to sort of involve the developer from the ideation process. And I think one of the key things that, or rather like one of the reasons as to why we really had like a great working relationship, between like the developers and the designer back at the company that we worked in with Kylie, is because there was that involvement in terms of like collaboration, where, for example, Kylie, who was primarily the designer, sorry, will go create something, like business requires something, she'd go do the designs, and before anything else, before even in a particular sprint, she'd come and then like consult the developers, and then she'd be like, oh, how what do you guys think about this particular design, or something of that sort. So it's really important to sort of have that collaboration, because two things can actually happen. The first one is the developers are going to like give you genuine feedback, and then it's going to be given the pressure that we have, or rather the time scope that we have, this really doesn't look feasible, something of that sort. And I think the upside to that is designers really like showing their work. So it's yeah, like have you so also they also get the validation that they need, and at the same time also just making that room for the feedback loop, whereby you can just be able to give feedback based on the designs and all that. And I think one of the things that I really came to later on understand like the aspect of it. In campus, we had a module called human-centered design. So basically, human-centered design introduced us to the principles of design. So the design principles, the basic aspects of them. And I think one of the main things that I actually see out here, because one of the things that Kylie also mentioned was the fact that like developers not necessarily coming to ask questions. They come back and then they say, okay, so why is this button rectangular? I want you to make it circular or something of that sort. So on the part of the developers, I think it's also important for us to sort of have a bit of understanding when it comes to the designer's language. So having that basic, not necessarily, this doesn't necessarily mean that as an aspiring developer, you have to go ahead and, start also trying to learn UI, UX design. No, that's not what I'm saying. But the concept of sort of understanding the basics when it comes to design, for example, the concept of the designer like trying to minimize the number of clicks that it takes for a particular user to perform an activity or something of that sort. So really sort of trying to understand, why designers do things the way they do. Because once again, when you come to realize that there's psychology like involved in all these things, it really changes your perspective. So yeah.
All right, awesome. That was great. All right, guys. So we have, I mean, it's already been quite a rich session as it is right now, but I think what we would like to do between Noel and myself is kind of address some, kind of like have a Q&A session between the two of us that we can kind of see. Sorry about that. Yeah, try and see what the perspectives are in terms of certain things. So we have some questions that we've lined up here. We have 4 questions, but I would also like to give time for the audience to answer, like to give ask their questions as well. So we're going to try to go through these and just trying to give our insights for the next couple of slides. So the first one is, what is the most challenging thing about working with a designer? Noella, what do you think is one challenging thing?
Okay,
Pick one.
I can think of a couple, but just picking just one. I think at the top of the hierarchy will be working with developers who give, the designers who come up with. Okay, I'd like to change my answer.
Go ahead.
Because this is
that's what this is for.
Because this is such a pain. The concept of working with designers and then they just give you like a Figma file to go and implement. So there's no, they're called hot points, key points.
Yeah, like hot points, like a prototype where you can click through.
Yeah. Okay. So no prototypes, and then you have to like go figuring out like what was this developer thinking during when they were doing the design. So or rather filling up. Okay, so when I click on this button, where am I supposed to go? So it's up to you to just like try and find the flow from the design,
like the next screen.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you're just out there just guessing what comes next.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good one. I think we mentioned this as well for the on my part, and I said this is something I think is really key, is having these prototypes. Okay, so
what is one most challenging thing about working with developers? Sorry.
I think from my experience, if I were to pick one of the most challenging things, is the general getting them to open up about challenges that they're having. So I think this is a big challenge. So, but this is more, this is probably the scope of my work. You'll find that UI have this so much, but as a problem, one of my to find out if I ask software engineer, for example, I'm expect back, and that's something a bit difficult to get. So the thing I would say one of the challenges also getting a software engineer to I think you can unmute yours so I can sorry, I think sorry, I think we lost for a second anyway. So that was one of my most challenging things, is to kind of find out like what is a software engineer actually working on right now. So that would be my number one challenge. Um, the next question we have is, do you think do you think developers and software engineers still undervalue the roles of designers in the product development cycle?
Okay. So I think I'll really be honest with this one. So initially, when I started out, I really thought UI UX design, especially UI UX design, was like a really really easy job, um, until I sort of, because one of the first gigs that I did was actually trying to sort of I built a website, so that was like one of my earliest gigs, and I really didn't realize how hard it is to just come up with a design for something simple such as a website. And a little bit of context: when Kylie was joining the company that we're working on together, we're working in together. So she joined like I think 1 year later.
Yeah, it was about a year.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was about a year.
it was about a year later. And
Yeah.
so I think what pretty much happened was initially, because it was pretty much a startup, trying to find its footing and then just validating the concept that they had in the market. And what they did is they first of all hired a designer to sort of just design the general steps that, or rather the features that they thought the business would need. And as we transitioned, or rather as we built the features, you'll realize that there was a bit of inconsistency. Okay, so the designer just gave the design, that was pretty much it. But then as time went by, and then you realize necessarily handled in the when it came to the designs, or rather there was like a missing piece, and then you'd had to implement as you go. And I believe we're like a bit of a team of 5 developers or something of that sort. So what would happen is when you would get to a place where you're building something and then you realize that there's a missing piece of the design, you'd have to like sort of on the fly implement as you go. And as I mentioned earlier, designers focus on functionality. So does it function? Yes, it does. So, and you can imagine, so working with like a team of up to 5 developers, everyone sort of just going with the flow, focusing on the functionality, but not necessarily paying close detail to user experience and what the system actually looks like. You can imagine like how chaotic that was. And I think what one of the experiences that really made me to sort of really, really, really give high regard to UI, UX, especially design, is when Kylie came through, when Kylie joined the team, and you could clearly see like a visible, like those, this visual distinction between before and after, like how you see where you put like before and after photos. I think that was the system. But yeah, so I don't necessarily think like developers sort of like undervalue the work that designers, or rather the role that they play in like a product.
Okay, awesome. That's good to hear for all the beginner designers out there. So I think that's awesome. The next thing is, what is one thing you'd like to see like designers do more? If there's one thing you could say, okay, if the designers could just do more of this when it comes to collaboration, or
I think I'd say more of sort of trying to understand the fundamentals of development. Say, for example, if you're doing like a web application, this is not necessarily to say that you need to like sort of understand programming as a whole, but just understanding the basics. For example, HTML and CSS, because I think you as a designer sort of having a bit of understanding on this is pretty much going to guide you even when you're creating your system, so that it's not so that you don't necessarily get to a place where developers are telling you that this is really not feasible in terms of the implication that it's going to have in terms of time, and also like on the number of resources that are going to like work on it. So yeah, having like a bit of understanding when it comes to the language that developers speak. So so what is one thing that you would like to see developers do more?
I think for me, with the experience that I've had, I think if I would say like if there's one thing I'd like to see developers do more is ask more questions. I think having questions early in the process to designers, pushing designers, why is this way, could actually open a lot of doors into, have we actually designed something in the optimal way? And I think getting more questions from software engineers is something I would really appreciate. I think, like, at first I was really hesitant to ask software engineers because I'm like, oh my gosh, they're gonna find, like, try to, like, put it in a way that's easier for them to do, but actually it's not that. It's getting their input earlier and them actually voicing their opinion is something I'd like to see more from software engineers.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think the last question is mostly based on tools. We don't want to go too much into the different tools in terms of, workflows and things like that. I think the overview here was just to point out, which I'll cover if Noella has to add anything. I think she will. But it's, collaboration tools. Kind of the tools you'll hear in the industry are like Slack, Notion, Trello, Jira, for example. These are all collaboration tools that are used between designers and developers. So for designers who are looking at kind of branching off into product design, these are the kind of tools you can expect to use. As UI UX designers, you probably won't hear too much of these tools unless it's like picking up your own design tasks, which in case you will hear, Notion, for example, or Slack. But generally, those are the kind of tools that you can see to be most effective in designer developer collaboration. And I think we can align on that. And I don't know if there's another tool that you would recommend, but I think
you've just captured them well.
Yeah, awesome. So that was the last question in terms of tools and workflows, but we don't want to go too much into that in this one because this presentation is more for beginners in the field. So we just want to wrap up this presentation now. We've gone a little bit over time than I would have liked, but I think we can just, it's been fruitful and been awesome. So I'll just cover kind of the positive ways to manage collaborations and how to manage these kinds of issues that we've talked a lot about some of the ways already, but this is just kind of to pull it full circle, which is common goals, having sessions together, having conversations together with software engineers, and allowing them to have a voice at the table when it comes to design, because I do believe it is important. Having feedback loops is something we've discussed as well in terms of testing and design. So if you hand over, this is also probably more with the product design perspective, but still good for designers to know and probably to suggest to their organizations, where if you propose a design, having the developer kind of build it out and then kind of reach out to you and say, can we test this together? Is this what you were thinking about? Or I've altered this because it's easier for me to build, but it still accomplishes the goal. And having those sessions is really great and really important. Dev roadmap involvement is something I would also highly consider, again, more from the product designer perspective, allowing them to have this voice in the roadmap. And so they also know what's coming up in the next 6 months, so they can also appropriately manage their workflows and their things. Noella, maybe you'd like to cover the other three that we have briefly.
You've mentioned, I think you earlier mentioned, like you wanted, one of the things that you wanted to see more of is developers actively communicating, what they're experiencing. So I think one of the things that really made our collaboration really, really fruitful was that, like an open feedback channel. So I think, like developers sort of learning how to collaborate, or rather how to share the feedback, or rather what they're experiencing. If a design is really not feasible, don't be afraid to speak up. You can bring it up with the design or with the product manager or the project manager. So always being able to communicate what exactly you're feeling, so that, remember, at the end of the day, work has to be enjoyable for all parties involved. As much as the designer is coming up with all these awesome designs and all that, so like don't be afraid to share whatever your views when it comes to the designs that are handed to you. Another one is really really respecting the role and expertise that every party brings to the table. As I've shared from my experience, and like how I really got to a point where I appreciated design and all that they bring to the table, like all the designers bring to the table. At the same time, I think it's also important for designers to sort of also really appreciate what developers do. So, and I think when these two, when there's like mutual respect between the two fields, then that leads to a sort of sweet spot, so to say. And then finally, designers are pretty much always going to be artistic, and they're going to, try to be experimental with the designs that come up with. That being said, as much as developers just try to focus on functionality and making sure that the system works and all that, it's also like important to sort of put something out there that users are going to use, and users are really impressed by really good user experience when it comes to using your site and your site or your application or something of that sort. So finding a sweet spot whereby like the developer, your functionality plus the level of feasibility that you're looking for matches with the level of artisticness that the developers bring to the table, the designers bring to the table, is really important. So sort of finding like a sweet spot between the two, so that both parties at the end of the day are happy, so that the designer is not necessarily coming up with design that gets turned down like all the time, because like this is really too hard to implement or something of that sort. So just finding a sweet spot between the perspective where the developer views or rather appreciates the business logic, or rather the scalability and functionality, to the artistic side of the designer.
All right, great. So yeah, that's our perspectives. And with that, I would like to wrap this up with just a few points you see on the screen. We've talked about flexibility. We've talked about perspectives. We've talked about respecting the roles. We've talked about a lot of things in this presentation, which I hope you can take away and that you can find very beneficial in your collaborations coming up. So I'd like to leave it there. And yeah, thank you guys so much for your attention in this presentation. I know it's been a lot, but we're so happy to have shared our insights with you. So thank you so much. We've really enjoyed it.
Okay, guys, I just appear on the screen. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation, both of you. Seriously, it's been a joy to listen. All what you explain, the different perspective, where are the challenges, how to overcome them. Seriously, it's been a great pleasure. I think you are just the proof to see that developers and designers can collaborate in an easier way, but also more importantly, in a more fun way. So seriously, thank you so much for being with us today, Kylie and Noella. Okay.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great.
It's been a pleasure. So, and now we don't have so much time left. So let's go over the question from the audience. Thank you, everyone. The people has been super engaged in the chat and they have posted so many questions. So thank you, everyone, for that. We have a super interesting question from Lynette. And the question is, would it be beneficial as a designer to have a basic understanding of coding so that the collaboration runs more smoothly?
I mean, I think I can take this one. Yes, I'm a big advocate of having knowledge or some kind of basic, like what Noella covered. I mean, just some kind of basic idea of what developers do and the kinds of I remember in Career Foundry there were certain well, this is specific to me anyway, is when I did the UI immersion course and did that, I really struggled to think what specialization I wanted to do. And there were more fun ones. They were more like at that time they were, I don't know, maybe like voice design or something like that at the time. Yeah. But I think taking the front end for designers was really helpful. So in short, the answer is definitely yes. I think having some kind of basic knowledge of this will help you greatly, also in understanding software engineers and developers. So yeah.
So great. Thank you, Kylie. So this is for both. Do you think like a good way would be to familiarize yourself like designers to the developers job and developers to the designers job, let's say?
Certainly. As I mentioned, like when designers sort of have a bit of understanding on what it entails to sort of do the basic UI, especially the UI aspect of it, it really dictates how they do their design, so that like they're not necessarily coming up with unrealistic sort of designs for developers to implement.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
I agree.
Great. Do you have like, it comes up to your mind, like any idea of a good practice? Like how could you do that? Like, I don't know, for example, workshops or share documents where you explain your processes or something like that? I don't know. I'm just thinking loud.
Hmm.
When it
What do you
comes to
think?
resources of learning,
Yeah,
like okay.
to familiarize with the others' roles and processes
I think
and
workshops is a good one. I think workshops is the best because,
workshops.
yeah, I think this is the best also because in your organizations, it's so difficult to say because every organization is different. It's structured differently. There's the roles also sometimes are not as clear. Like sometimes you'll go in as a UI UX designer and find yourself doing, I don't know, more like product owner roles or things. So I think having, in terms of the understanding each other's roles, I think it would be really good to have workshop sessions where you sit together in one room and actually go over these different things. For me, workshops would be the best. I really don't think like document. I mean, we go through enough documentation as it is in our role, so I think workshops are great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
maybe to just add on that, I think there's also like really available free resources nowadays whereby you
Hmm.
don't necessarily need to sort of like start setting up a lot of things. You can just go and start getting your hands dirty on
Hmm.
online tools. Like no necessarily you don't necessarily need to understand like all the toolings. So that gives you like also like a basic understanding.
Yeah.
Great. Also, an easier way, something that you mentioned before during the presentation, Noella, that I love is that developers could be included in the design process since the very beginning. Do you think this is something that it's happening or that could be possible to do?
It is happening because
Mm.
I think one of the active like really great developer designer collaborations, like it was really positive. For example, you're working with Kylie, so I think
Mhm.
it's a matter of if it's really not happening, because you'll find that pretty much most companies are really different, and some of them prefer to just not necessarily disturb the
Mhm.
developers,
Yeah.
just like involve them when there's need. But I think there's really tremendous need when it comes to developer involvement throughout the whole step, throughout like all these steps, from ideation right away, right, to the final step of testing. And even that being said, test designers also necessarily need to be involved in things like
Mm.
testing. So it's not necessarily just involving the
Yeah.
developer, but like also ensuring that the designers themselves are involved in then all these processes as well.
Yeah. I think that's definitely key. I think it's important to understand that I think theology in terms of how we talk about the roles and the processes and like design process and how to develop a feature from inception to to market. I think we follow a lot of theology and best practices like they call in the industry, but we do need to learn to adjust and be flexible. I really am a huge advocate for having software engineers in the sometimes even as close to the ideation phase, and this is very like this is not considered traditional processes. This is like adjusting to an organization and adjusting to a product. So if I come up if there's user need, for example, for feature A, why should and let's say the first version of feature A is already at the market, it's already shipped, and now we want to expand on that feature. I think the software engineer should be there to understand like how they've built this, not the designer going through all the user feedback, expanding now on the feature, and then the developer then saying, oh, but I didn't build it this way, it can't quite. And I didn't build it this way because I didn't understand the expansion of that feature, I didn't understand where that feature was going. And that's where then really from ideation all the way to road mapping, I think they should be involved and have a voice at the table, for sure.
It's amazing. It's so interesting to hear you all what you are saying. So thank you so much for sharing, both of you. It's great. So let's go over the question from the audience. There's a question from Marina, and the question is: what's the best way to communicate context to the developers? I think this is like a question maybe for Noella.
Mhm.
I think it's like for most companies, you can really try and avoid like all these bureaucratic type of things, because I feel like having an environment whereby you're really open. So as a developer, or rather as a designer, it's you can easily just reach out to developers via, for example, like a Slack message, and ask like, hey, are you ready to like, are you willing, like, do you have some time, or when can you set up a call? So trying to make
Mm.
it in such a way that the feedback loop is as short as possible, so
Mm.
that it's easy to sort of loop in the developers. So just having an open sort of system whereby
Mhm.
it's easy to like reach the developers without like a lot of bureaucracy, so that way the feedback loop is really fast. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, in regards to context, I would say the things that we've mentioned before. So if a designer is looking at context, like how can I take this design from this static, what I understand? Because the developer can I mean, sorry, a designer can probably go over those user flows in their sleep. They know how this product is designed. They know how it's supposed to work. So you have to kind of take what's in your mind and that autonomy that's happening and put it in a way that someone else with a different way of thinking can understand. And the only way I found to do that so far is to have really, really well described cards that you put into sprints. So for developers, they like to understand the problem. So what problem are you trying to solve? So you can have a section, and let's say in a Jira card that's like problem. This is the user problem. This is what we're trying to solve. This is the design prototype for that problem. So if a software engineer then sees, no, there's still something I'm still not getting the context or the why, like what is the why of this, they can always reach out to the designer. And the design, I'm very sure, I don't know any designer that would be like, no, don't contact me about my designs. I think they're very happy to go through it with you, and make sure that the context is understood. So I think it's written in a written form, in a visual form, and if necessary, a call. So also as designers, we need to be open to that and make time for that if we want our designs to see fruition in the way we've designed them. So that's maybe for context. That's what I think.
Yeah, great insights. Thank you so much. Yeah, there are so many ways to communicate with your colleagues. We just have to use all of the tools that we have available for that. So great insight. Thank you both. Okay, let's go over a question for product designer. This question is from Stefano. Uh, as product designer, you work a lot with data, KPIs, and decide what to optimize and change.
Yes, I do. So we work a lot with data. I'm very happy to be working with a company like Farm Better that really value their data. But this again is very company specific. I've worked in certain products that actually have no data, and we just kind of rely on user feedback. And sometimes that can be, it's not insightful enough. We need to know certain pieces of data that can help us understand what users are actually doing, not what they're saying to us. Because if you go to a user and you ask them like something like, so how did you like this feature? Did it solve your problem? They'll be like, yeah, feature's great, solved my problem. But initially you kind of designed it probably to take 2 minutes and it's taking them 10 minutes. Why is it taking them 10 minutes to go through this user flow? That's not how we designed it. What is wrong? Like, is there a bottleneck somewhere? They do not understand something? Like, and that's something data can tell you. And there are certain indicators that we look for, that tell us more about our user interactions and what our users are actually doing. But not every company takes the time to capture this data. And so you'll find, in especially most startups, they just don't have the capacity. So this is not talking about large, like if you enter a really large organization that have the resources to kind of every single, have a huge amount of KPIs that you can actually say, okay, now we know exactly this tracking, we're tracking this user, we know exactly what they're doing even before they're going to do it. But most of us will find ourselves as beginners not in this environment. Let's be realistic. You'll probably find yourself in a startup, even if it's just as an intern or as a part-time thing while you're doing your studies or whatever. So they sometimes just don't have the capacity. So yes, now I'm working, thankfully, with a company that really values data. But initially, it's difficult to get people to see that value because they're too focused on making sales. So you'll find as a product designer, you start hearing things like, yeah, we really need to sell this, this particular product within our SaaS. But they're not really thinking about, wait a minute, are we collecting the data, enough data to make those decisions? And that's something I think now definitely I'm working with. So in connection to that, it would be good also to kind of familiarize yourself if you are looking towards going to product design, to actually maybe do a small course and, maybe just a Google kind of analytics course, trying to understand data, how to read data, data, how to visualize data, because that's something you need to make decisions. So yeah.
Amazing. Great insight. We can find so many answers in data analyst. So good, good, good. Okay, this question is for Noella. It's a funny one. So Jenny is asking, I want to know examples of a developer's nightmare in terms of decisions designers try to
In,
take.
in terms of what?
In terms of decisions designers try to take or take.
Oh, that's a good one.
Nightmare of developers. Um, First things first, not necessarily providing, or say for example, you've provided designs for a website, so to say, and then you just give the website version, like like the big screen designs, and then not necessarily providing responsive designs. So it's up to that developer starting to think about things like how will it look like on a tablet, or how will it look like on a mobile view, or something of that sort. So developers really hate thinking. Like, we just want to be given the designs. Please make sure that we have everything so that we can start the development. So I think working with like a designer who doesn't necessarily provide the responsive versions of that, and once again, to top it all off, unrealistic designs, worst nightmare ever. Yeah.
Realistic designs. Okay. Great. Thank you. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm gonna try to take a few more questions from the audience. So there is an interesting question from Marina. How can we figure out when our design is not feasible and when developers just don't want to do the work because they have to build something new from scratch? That's really interesting.
That's a really good question.
It is a very good question. It's a very good question. That's a good question. I think it's hard. It's hard for, I think from the designer perspective, it's very difficult. But I don't think developers have a problem. Well, I don't think developers have a problem with building features that are not feasible. Let's say, for example, you have a really cool design, has all these animations and colors and all these things happening that's amazing for the user. I don't think it's building that's the problem. It's the time. It's saying something of the sorts of, okay, there's this amazing design. I know that needs to be done within this sprint. That's 2 weeks. That's where we start encountering issues. If you told a developer, hey, there's this thing and take 6 months, take 3 months, they'll be like, cool, I'll see you in 3 months. I don't think it's that they don't want to do the work. It's that they need to be able to keep realistic expectations. They also have to be answerable to the work they need to do. So I don't think it's an issue of that. I wouldn't like to say that software engineers just don't want to do the work. But as in terms of feasibility and how you can know this, the only way you can know if your designs are feasible is if you have had an interaction with the software engineer who will be developing that feature. I don't see any other way for you to determine that or to know that. And I think the more we work on the collaboration and the more we work at how to work with each other, these are soft skills. These are not things like you're going to learn in a book. This is something you have a team. You may have somebody who's a little bit more difficult to work with. There might be more pushback from this person, but I don't think this person will ever sit and say, yeah, I just don't want to do this. I just can't do this in this time, which then goes back to what you were saying about, developers are measured by how fast they can do something. So if you're challenging them on how fast they're going to do this, it's going to be like, no, I'm sorry, like this just cannot be delivered, but it can be delivered in 3 months. That's one of the things I hear the most is, I can't do this in this, but I can do it give me another 6 weeks, and then maybe we can review. And this sometimes just doesn't align with business. So that now has to go back to business, where business will then say, we need it now. So then it's the designer's responsibility to manage this and to think, okay, business said they need it. This can't be done in 2 weeks. So can we do maybe a version 1? Is there a way I could kind of have a lean design where I could at least work towards the design that I want. You may not be able to get it right off the bat, but then you'll be able to get it maybe to fruition in 3 months, for example. That's my take on that anyway. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I think you've summed it really, really well. I think I should have given a disclaimer. It's really not that you're going to be opposing the designs, but it's purely going to be in terms of the time that you have to do the implementation. And then I think what I can just actually top off is if your developers are really avoiding the work, then there's a bit of problem there with the developers.
Think you need to check that. I think
Just
business may need, HR may need to step in there if it gets to that point. But
yeah,
90% of the time I don't see this.
Yeah, but yeah. So and then once again, just I think the whole concept of involving the developers from the process, from the step of ideation, just keeping them in the loop, then it avoids us, like, it sort of prevents this scenario where you get to like an end product and then they're really not comfortable with the designs, because like having them give the feedback on every step of the process sort of also gives you the feedback that you need to sort of do the necessary adjustments as well. So yeah, everyone loves to get involved. Like everyone loves to give the feedback and to feel like they're being heard. So even you might find that sometimes now I come to realize that Kylie, you might have been playing some games on us. Like when someone is involved in all the steps of the way, so you might find that the designs are complex, but because you took some time and then involved the developers throughout the design process and all the flows that are needed, because they signed off on it, so they have no they have no alternative. They just have to go ahead and
so then a higher accountability on their part.
Yeah.
So like if you were involved in that process, why do we come to the end where you now say it's not feasible?
Yeah.
It helps everyone keep their accountability, including the designers and of course as well the software engineers.
Yeah, amazing. This is so interesting that I would stay like 1 hour longer here speaking with you, but unfortunately we are actually over time. Just to close the Q&A, could you share like maybe the 3 or 2 top skills, soft skill that would make this collaboration better, easier, and
I would say, I don't know if this is necessarily a soft skill, but I think having more, just being able to find a way to communicate, not just written in the written form. Because sometimes when it's good to practice the soft skill of having meetings, having your video on, reading the facial expression of software engineers, reading how they're behaving, and that can tell you a lot. So I know we all like to hide behind, that, don't show video kind of thing, and we sit in our pajamas sometimes as freelancers sitting in, and that's fine. But I think it's important to maintain the human aspect of working together. And in a world where we're now finding a lot of remote teams, these collaborations just become harder because you're not sitting in the same room. Ideal scenario for me would be sitting right next to software engineers in the same office, not in our own department somewhere with our whiteboards, but actually sitting together. And if I have an idea and I think, let me design this, I'll kind of reach over and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And they'll be like, I don't understand that. Like, how is that supposed to work? And I don't know if that's necessarily a soft skill, but it's something I feel we've lacked, this human connection when we work. And we want to be able to still work remotely and be efficient. Nobody wants to be unproductive. We want to have a productive process, but we need to kind of maintain this human aspect of how we work. So that's something for me. I don't think it's 3, but it's something I feel is like collectively something we should definitely look at improving the process.
Yeah, really important. What about you, Noella?
So just to echo, so this still pretty much goes back to communication. So as Kylie has said, you might find that, with how we're working, a lot of work is remote. This is really not to say for CEOs and, people who have influence that we need to go back to the office. It's pretty much more to say, just finding channels whereby we foster that sort of communication. So it's not necessarily because developers are people who like to stay in the cocoons. Most developers are people who like to stay in the cocoons. So you'll find that in most cases, communication has to be sort of initiated for it to be fruitful. So this will pretty much how can you be able to like sort of foster such communication? Having these cycles whereby we set up meetings. For example, we have sprint planning, or rather during like the whole design process. So having systems whereby we know that like this standard procedure, say for example designs, there's the first need of approval, the first round whereby you just want to get sort of feedback. So having systems whereby there's clearly articulated need for that sort of feedback and communication. So sort of just having that initiation in the first place.
Yeah. And just one thing, I mean, it's also nice for those who have companies, I mean, have more like, I don't know, team building activities with these two teams, because you can learn a lot from someone by just being out of the office. I mean, there's nothing, not everything we discuss has to do with sitting behind a computer and, looking at our, trying to achieve goals and trying to make money for these companies, because that's what we're doing with all these user experience and all these building all these software. That's what we're doing. But also remembering the human aspect. Get out there, do something together that brings out these characteristics that then will make it much easier for you guys to work together. And I think that was great. Like we've had like one team building activity where we went and like did zip lining in the forest together, and it's great, and it just humanizes everyone a little bit. You realize this software engineer is just as human as I am. They're not these cold people sitting behind there trying to push back all our designs, saying, oh my gosh, this designer is so like this. So I think that's also something to consider in the bigger picture.
Amazing. It's been such a great pleasure. Thank you so much for answering all of the questions, for the great presentation. Seriously, great pleasure to have you both here and listen to you. Before we close this webinar, I would like to share with you a few things. We have a special discount offering that we are offering this November. A tuition reduction worth up to 18% of all of our programs. So if there is anyone here interested in getting into this exciting field of UX or UI designer or web development, so this is your chance. And if you would like to receive more information, you could book a call with one of our program advisors by simply clicking on the sticky note that you can see at the top of the chat. Then also, if you would like to learn further, Career Foundry has a blog where you can read great articles about these topics. And also there is a YouTube channel where you can watch great video content. And also, please check out our events page, because we have more upcoming events. And actually, we are going to have a webinar next week in design thinking. So if there is anyone here interested in that, I'm sharing the link in the chat, so you can have a look to the webinar. And if you are interested, we could see us again soon. And that's all from my side. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Kylie. Thank you, Noella. It's been such a great pleasure. And maybe we would see us again. We don't know. Maybe.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. And if you have any additional questions or anything, don't, feel free to find us on LinkedIn. We can always happy to answer questions and still connect with the audience. If there's anything we've missed or something you feel, no, I didn't get my question answered, feel free to contact us. We're always happy to answer. So have a good evening, morning, afternoon from wherever you are. And again, thank you so much, Belinda. It's been always a pleasure. Thank you.
A pleasure. Always.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye. Have a good day. Ciao.
Ciao.